Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and we learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I'm your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you are an interesting person in IT, let us know. You might be our next first person. The next voice you hear will be today's guest. He is Paul Price. Paul is, I can tell you, definitely one of the most interesting people in IT. He is currently the CEO and founder of the IASA, the not for profit professional association for all business technology architects. It's built and run by architects for architects. And I'm pretty certain, knowing Paul, that we're going to touch on that at some point during this conversation. But Paul, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And first up, what's the first thing people should know about you?
The first thing that people should know about me is that's a great question.
Yeah.
That I am an unbelievably passionate person about everything I do.
Mhm.
Whether it's cooking, whether it's travel, whether it's ISA, whether it's architecture, or whether it's just a conversation about what makes technology and businesses tick, anything.
Yeah.
I get very, very invested in anything I do. And I think that probably resonates through every part of my life.
Well, that can't be a bad thing, right? And it's certainly been my experience of knowing you that if we're going to do something, we're going to do it with great passion. So that sets us up nicely, I hope, for a good conversation. Section one of first person, I like to call first things first, and this is where we get to know about our guest by understanding some of their first times. So, Paul, please tell me about your first job in this industry, your first job in IT.
So I had a very weird first, as many architects, as many of us do in our field. And I've had some wonderful conversations about that myself. It's one of the benefits of my job is I get to
Mhm.
hear people's story all the time. My first job was an assistant project manager at a place called Human Code, which was a UI design shop in Austin, Texas.
Uh-huh.
I had just finished my Japanese degree, which was an interesting choice. And it was actually just a sort of, it was kind of a calling kind of thing. Or magical set of numbers lined up. I was, in fact, before that, the first student in the University of Texas's liberal arts department to ever receive a grant for a technology project.
Ah.
So I actually, as a senior, in college, I actually put together a team. I went to my Japanese professor and I said I want to do a multimedia project, and so I put together a team of students, got money from the university, and built kind of a. It was a university award-winning multimedia CD exploration of Japanese culture.
Uh-huh.
And Human Code saw this and said, "Wow, we've got to have this kid." So I never considered an IT career. It wasn't
Right.
something I was. It was. I love technology, but as a consumer. Then Human Code hired me to help them build their business to business practice, consultative practice, if you will. And I kind of ended up working directly for the VP and building out the multiple projects there. Taught myself to code while I was there, and learned all things consultative and technology oriented, um, from up to a certain point, and
Yeah.
that led to just the many follow on roles. So it was a very much a stroke of oddity that led to it.
Yeah.
One of my passions is what happened. I got obsessed with this CD, and I was going to create this experience, and I just do whatever it takes to get to that thing.
Yeah. It's so interesting because so many of the interesting people you meet in this industry, like, have a similar origin story, right? That they
Yep.
didn't necessarily think, oh, my career path is going to be I'm going to work in IT and I'm going to become an architect. In your case, in fact, maybe that didn't even exist, right? So, would you say that was kind of the first time that you thought, this is the industry for me?
So, I'm trying. My first statement is about my every one of my firsts comes from a following that line of
Yeah.
passion
Yeah,
until
yeah,
I bump into something else that creates that level of passion or higher. And literally, so I took my Japanese degree and my work at Human Code over to Dell. It took that to Dell Japan, where I then got my first chief architect title. But I had wanted to live in Japan since I was 12, right? And had
right.
read James Clavell's famous novel on Japanese culture, Shogun, right? And
Yep,
so to me, that guiding star is everything, and everything else just goes by the wayside.
yep,
And that how I got there. But it is very like a lot of people in our
yeah,
businesses. It's just driven by an inner vision.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think also sometimes it's that first time you think, "Oh, I'm good at this," or like I'm
Yeah.
adding value, and was that something? I guess at Human Code, maybe you found your feet in that sense, or was that later on? But like you really felt like you were able to add value.
So I think a lot of architects suffer from, and a lot of IT leaders suffer from the you know deep fear that you're not good at things,
Yep.
right? That you can't know it all. There is so much to know in our field. Uh, I've always considered myself more of an adventurer and an explorer than
Uh huh.
anything else. And so for me, it's never about what I do well. What am I experiencing, growing, and accomplishing next. So it's much
Yeah.
more about again, it's always that guiding direction and less about. I knew that I love to work, right, and I love my work, and I love the way that technology creates deep. Like I always say, we build the modern cathedrals,
Yeah.
right? And that passion, that drive, when you think about that building drive of I'm going to make something beautiful for someone, I think that is
Yeah.
even more important to me than the self-recognition in it. I,
Uh
I
huh.
much I much more feel like I have to see this vision come to life. Um, and that's just
Yeah.
and everything else can just take a second seat to that, back seat to that.
That's really interesting, and also something that I think you hear from successful people often. But and you kind of touched on this, but there was some changes there, right? You found your feet at Human Code. You've gone to Dell at a certain point, and within Dell, your roles change. What was the what was and maybe there wasn't, but was there a first promotion or a first job role change that was prompted by something, maybe chasing that passion, but like really felt like it was the right thing, right? Like we're finding our
Oh,
groove.
that job in Japan set
Yeah.
me on to the greatest adventure I would consider of my professional life. The I When I got to Japan, I was a development manager, and it was about getting to Japan. But what happened is I got absorbed in Dell's mission and goals and achievements, not in their IT department, but actually in their marketing and sales. So back in 1999, I was already effectively owning an online store before Amazon, before
Right.
people were doing that, right? So I had a customer facing technology that I was effectively responsible for. And and that's when the passion and drive took over. I was going to make an online experience for our customers that fundamentally altered the way that Dell sold computers. And that was just a completely different job than anybody in
Mhm.
IT ever had, right? At that time. Back then, IT was an enabler. This was front of the house, direct sales to customers. And so, what the change was is I both almost got fired and got the best promotion of my life.
Right.
Because I built the new online store for Dell Japan, and it was horrible because I did not know quality attributes and all these things that
Yeah,
great
yeah,
architects
yeah,
have to know, right? But and so it was a terrible release because it was so unstable.
yeah.
We stabilized it over a couple of weeks, and I was just this, an inch close to going back home, and sleeping under the desk, the whole war story, right?
Yeah.
And then we got it stabilized, but it was such a powerful engine
Hmm.
that I was able to personally champion a business case for the development of what would today be considered an AI recommendation engine, right? It
Uh-huh.
would be Amazon recommendations, Netflix recommendations. Well, that didn't exist. So we used fuzzy logic and all these great things, um, and it cost us next to nothing to do the project because of the structure of the system. And that the basically the VP of marketing, the effective general manager of Dell, walked over to my desk and said, "What job do you want?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Chief architect."
So this is
And I was
interesting.
27 and had
Yeah.
no idea what I was doing. Right. So it was hair on fire, 100-hour weeks, at least, I ate, drank, slept, believed in Dell technology. Yeah. So that transformation from dev manager to
Yeah.
front of the house technology, chief architect, driving customer behavior was the quintessential moment of my career, I think, outside of founding ISA.
That's and there's so much in that, Paul. It's really interesting, right? So, I mean, your story there. I think the story of almost every kind of successful um, online, certainly online e-commerce situation from that period would probably be similar,
Mhm.
right? Because nobody knew, right? We were all kind of stumbling into this. I think about my
Yeah.
own career in terms of purely from a journalistic perspective. I used to run the website as a sideshow, as a hobby kind of thing, and then here I am,
Wow.
25 years later, right? That's my but I think also, like, there are echoes there to your point about Amazon, Netflix, like that building the
Mhm.
thing gave you the architecture from which other things could be built, right? But that wasn't the goal in the first place. You were trying to get a store up, right? But you ended up developing infrastructure that could. And then the other thing that's super interesting there is in fact, the last question I'll ask you in the first section is about the first great boss or the first mentor or the first person in your career who really helps kind of shape where you are. And I don't know, the VP in this story sounds like they're pretty smart because they recognized something that, somebody else might have fired you in that situation. Whereas it
Don
seems
was
like
a
they
very,
said,
very, very intelligent man, but he had absolutely nothing on a gentleman. But no, I shouldn't say it that way. They were both wonderful, but my
yeah,
true mentor was a CTO and who is now currently the chief architect of the Mayo Clinic. Is a guy named Steve Damon. Steve is is a uh, theoretical physicist by training and preference, but a CTO because, well, you didn't make much money in theoretical physics, and but the fascinating things about Steve are just he is effectively a hobby farmer, lived out on a farm with no power at one point, no
wow,
running water. Yeah, and would go into to work to do a CTO's job in his overalls.
huh,
Um, he was to put Steve in perspective. He is just brilliant, tough as
mhm,
nails, and brilliant. So working with him and a gentleman by the name of Chris Ross, who's the CIO of Mayo Clinic, um, I learned real architecture working with the two of them. Right, in the
uh-huh,
sense that it was deeply, deeply. Um, we were very much into the fundamental theory of architecture back then and figuring
right.
out how to make great architectures work. And that was a very intense process because they have minds that are huge.
Yeah, yeah. Global quality minds. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we do this show is, you know what? There are such a number of really interesting people in IT, and Steve
Yeah.
and your other colleagues definitely sound like that. So this is amazing, Paul. I really appreciate it. What an interesting story. But it can't all be good stuff, right? So we're going to move to section two now, which we call first fails, because we're not only here for the good stuff. And actually, when I think about my own professional life, I've learned a lot more from my mistakes. You've already spoken about this than I have from my success. So, would
Mm.
you say? I mean, one of our questions is the first big mistake. Maybe that was some of the mistakes you made in the setting up of that online store. But is there anything else you can think of that maybe keeps you awake at night, or maybe actually led on to better things through kind of making the error kind of thing?
So, I mean, it's such an important point because failure is the systemic management of failure is how we innovate, right?
Mhm.
there's a wonderful gentleman out of Ireland who I interviewed, who talks a lot about how humans learn, and that failure is how we learn, right? Doing it wrong with guidance is the number one way you teach doctors. It's how you teach
Hmm.
professionals around the world. You give them safe environments to do miniature failures until they get it right. Innovation is all driven based off of the 99 not ways to not build a light bulb. Um, you know, I think failure is a hard thing for me in that sense. I fail quite often, quite regularly, because I'm
Hmm.
constantly trying to do something no one's ever done before.
Yeah.
Um, and so the store that I said was my first. That was my first true career failure, meaning I was this close to being fired. And
Yeah.
when you work 100-hour weeks and you have great successes and things like that, you're just not used to that concept.
Yes. 100%.
Um, and it made me realize how little I knew, right,
Yeah.
about what I was doing, how little I really understood rigor. So I went to work for Steve with the idea, with the word rigor in mind, right? So what is rigor? How can I be a great architect and actually know what I'm doing and repeat success? Um, ISA has been a constant screaming failure in a million ways every day, right? I, I like to say, we get called the best kept secret in architecture all the time because
Right.
we don't know how to market, right? Oh, how do you market as a nonprofit? How do
Yeah.
you build communities of architects who sometimes like to be around each other, but we're called an argument for a reason, like so I didn't know anything about being an architect when I became one. I didn't know
Yeah.
anything about being a company, a CEO when I became one. I didn't know anything about being a community leader when I became one.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could list the failures, but what happens out of that is you build resilience, and success takes a lot more resilience than failure does, in my opinion.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Failure is easy compared to success.
Yeah. Although I mean, I think the point I would put to that is, you know, one does meet from time to time people who have never experienced or acknowledged failure, and that is something that's lacking in their, like you cannot fully professionally develop or personally develop until you've experienced and
Yep.
acknowledged failure. I think, and you articulated that beautifully. Like you learn so much more from those failures. Because one of the things you learn, and this is a question we like to ask as well, but I think you may have covered off it to a certain extent, but is like the first time you realize that something you thought you knew may be wrong, kind of thing. That's kind of a key moment. Like, can you think of anything like that in your sort of professional life?
So again, because of exploration. So you go into an exploration as prepared as you can be,
Hmm.
and then you realize there was no way to be prepared. I kind of liken it
Yeah,
to when I became a father, right?
yeah,
When you have your marriage, right? You go in trying to you go in prepared for all the wrong things,
yes, 100%.
right? When you look back, um, once you get used to exploration, if you want to innovate, truly innovate, there was a great scene in I think it's the movie about the president, and it was not the movie, it was the series, West Wing, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
in one of the scenes, Leo says, you got to admire Sam. He failed spectacularly, but he failed at full speed. You know, there was
yeah,
like a Sam-sized hole in the wall when he got done.
yeah,
It was like, and I feel like that is me, right? And that is what I encourage in people is
yeah,
if you're going to innovate hard, go at it, create the culture that you need to create new ideas, and realize that 95% of those ideas are going to fail. Okay, so but when I think about failure and what I've done, like what I've learned is, so for example, we still don't know how to do communities of real professionals in IT, right?
yeah. Hmm.
We have no idea how to professionalize in IT, none. We have a skill shortage that is so large when I think of the actual comparison of the skills we need to do the things that are in the headlines, and yet we have no concept of that, right? We have jobs, we have roles, But that garage programmer concept, right? That's not how you create an engineer in the world, right? You can't be a structural engineer because you built a couple of Lego things in your garage, right? You have
Yeah.
to actually fundamentally prepare people. So, like, this is a huge area that I've been exploring for decades and trying to understand the dynamics of the IT fields and how they work together. What is an engineer? What is an architect? What is a project manager? Where are the limits of their roles? What do they
Mhm.
need to know to be prepared? How do they deal with AI? How do we experiment with new technology? We literally have none of the institutions that I'm aware of, and there's so much. There's just so much benefit that we get in other fields from those. So I consider those to be my experimental playground. Right, that's the stuff that gets me excited in
Yeah.
IT. Is what would it look like to actually run AI experiments from a business perspective, business technology perspective, so that we
Yeah.
could instead of having 90% failed business cases, we could have 90% failed experiments and
Yes.
10% holy cow big wins, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely how it feels. Where we are right now, date stamping it in May 2025 around AI actually is like people have felt their way towards something approaching what
Mhm.
you're talking about, but are probably not taking full advantage of it because we don't have that rigor around it, right? Like it's kind of like we're going to write off all the projects from 24. We learned something, but it has to be ROI now. And I do feel like what you're talking about in terms of that rigor and structure around experimentation and failure is just super important and lacking. And I wish you well, Paul, in completing your life's work and bringing that rigor to that process.
Well, I think it's partnerships like this and these kind of episodes and these kinds of questions that we have for IT leaders out there, right? I think that's the exciting conversation is what does a maturity look like for
Yeah.
technologists, right? How do we want to shape the future? Because everybody needs ROI. Everybody needs to get return on their investments, and that's just as true in healthcare research as it is in
Mhm.
technology research. Um, and so, what the institutions of the future are going to look like, I think, are going to be quite interesting as we, as
Yeah.
a species, adapt. I talk a lot about this. It's just you see these adaptations occur with humanity as our technological advances occur. Right,
Mhm.
everything from farming through industrial revolutions they're not clean transformations. People
No.
talk about them like they were wonderful times, but they were just the industrial revolution was very hard
Yep.
on the species, right? So the
Yep.
technology revolution is got just as many ups as it's got downs, and it's got we are learning as
Yes.
a group of humans how we want to treat this thing. Do we want it to be completely Wild West, kind of the way it is now? Do we want to have controlled experimentation in certain areas? Do we want to have degree programs and licenses for professionals? Where does
Yeah.
that final point rent? And I think this is really cool because this actually directly affects the bottom line of every company.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's really a great story because when you do it well, you
Yeah.
win, right?
Yeah.
You win. You get huge rewards from effective technology innovation in a shipping company, in
Well,
a retailer, in a hospital.
and the alternative is also true, right? If you don't do it well, the chances are you won't exist, thrive, and survive.
Yeah,
And to your point, our professional lives have coincided with an industrial revolution, and no one knows where the industrial revolution ends during the industrial revolution, right? Like there is a Charles Dickens out there who's writing our stories right now, but who's still being read in 100, 200 years is going to be super interesting to know. So
this
yeah.
is I think the really great our backwards looking view
Mhm.
should be teaching us a little bit better. I think, right? I mean, we've
Yeah.
spent billions of dollars on a microservices kind of thing, and I don't want to talk about the tech. It's not important what the tech
Yeah.
is. It's that for a decade we just spent huge numbers of dollars on what we call transformation, and
Mhm.
now. we hit a point and everybody looks back and goes, oh, maybe that wasn't the best
Yeah,
way to do it. You know?
yeah.
And I went, well,
It's always
that
the
was
way.
billions of dollars I could have spent on building cathedrals, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's,
Yeah, no, for sure. It's always the way, and again, it's like it's why, as hard as it is sometimes, I do often feel like what an amazing time it is to sort of be alive and to work, but equally
mm,
like having that backwards projection because history doesn't repeat itself really, but patterns of behavior within history definitely do repeat themselves. They just get faster
yep.
at times. So yeah. Okay, thank you, Paul. I mean, like, I feel like we could really go on for hours and hours, as we often do when you and I speak. But I want to get to our section that we call quick fire firsts. This is where we want to get to know you beyond the professional veneer. We want to
Oh, yeah.
find out about the real person. And to do that, I have actually commissioned my own team of architects to build a random question generator. And all you have to do, Paul, is choose a number from between 1 and 13.
1 and 13. I'm going with
Mm-hmm.
13.
Okay. What was the first time you earned any kind of money? Tell us about that.
First time I earned any kind of money?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I mean, I can
Okay,
tell you.
so the one that stood out for me, that popped into my head is really that was fourth grade.
Uh-huh.
I was a lackluster student at best because I was deeply uninterested in education
Yeah.
without practical application. And my mom said she would give me $50 if I got straight A's.
Oh, there you go. Little bit of
So,
bribery.
and $50 to a fourth grader was a ridiculous amount of money
Yeah.
at the time. Yeah. So, yeah, so I got straight A's.
And that tells us something about motivation and incentives, I think. So we'll take that away as a
Yeah,
little.
she
Okay.
asked me what I would need to get straight A's, and I said $50, and she said okay, and
Well,
so I got straight A's.
I'm
And
going
she
to
said,
say
you realize at the end," which she told me, "you realize at the end you didn't really work that hard at this," and I went, "Yeah, I know, but."
hard enough. I mean, I have to say the mistake your mother made there was asking the open question, right? Like, if I'm framing that towards my kids, I'm going to start low and negotiate up, kind of thing. But
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay, let's do one more. Give me one more number between 1 and 13, and it can't be 13. So let's say a number between 1 and 12.
7.
7. Ah, tell me about, and this is interesting for you, Paul, specifically. Tell me about the first place you would go right now if money was no object.
Antarctica.
Ah, yeah. Okay, I can see
Through Argentina, there's a little boat that leaves out of
that.
Argentina. So I would go through Argentina. I would spend some time there, and then I would take the boat down to Antarctica. I
Yeah,
think it's I think it's a 10 to 20-day trip.
yeah.
Come back to Argentina and
And
settle in for a little bit.
is that something you've done before, or something you've wanted? Because you're a very well-traveled person, so like,
Yeah, it's the only continent I haven't been to.
oh, there you go.
So
Okay,
it's if I couldn't do that one, then I would probably take a 2-month tour of Africa.
yeah, yeah. They both sound like extremely interesting and rewarding experiences. And I am saying that as someone who spends their life sitting in this shed, speaking to interesting people. So maybe I should get out there, right, and get myself down to Antarctica. Okay, brilliant. So let's move on to section 4, which is our first and final thoughts. Okay. The first question I want to ask you here is, what's the first piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out right now?
Rigor. Learn rigor.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're an engineer or project manager or people. We talk about the sort of dumbing down effect that we're worried about.
Mhm.
I don't think that's going to be an issue because when things go wrong in this level of a connected world, it will be at a level that we will need tens of thousands of more people who know the depth, right? So all great learning comes from understanding, or at least deeply understanding how to do things well, right? So learn the rigor of your trade, whether you're a project manager,
Yeah.
an architect, an IT manager, understand what a benefit is, understand what a requirement is, understand
Yeah.
what a pattern is, apply them, learn how they connect together, learn how that they impact each other, and then learn that again to the degree at which you can master your
Yeah.
topic area. Yeah, I see a lot of people say learn. You have the new language of of professionalism is learning, and that's true. That's been true historically. That's not a new
I,
concept.
I
Um,
completely agree.
but we have
Yeah.
fewer and fewer people focusing on depth and rigor,
Yeah.
and so
I,
that to me, those people will never be look for a job. They will never look to succeed because when you understand how things work together, you are always essential.
and I think, it's interesting, your fourth grade story. Like, this is one of many ways where I think you're probably better than me, Paul, because that took me until my final year of college, right? But like, is the moment where, you realize actually the value is in the rigor of the learning, right? It's not even
Yeah,
about the results in the end. And I was studying drama and English literature, right? It wasn't about rigor in the sense of understanding how things work, but it was do the work even if no one's watching, because like in the end,
yeah,
like anybody who succeeds in anything, whatever you're doing, DIY around the house, parenting, to your point, like I feel like, without coming all overall kind of high performance podcast, right? I feel like there is reward in the rigor, and actually anybody who ever achieves anything, they've put the rigor into whatever that thing is. So that's that. I think that's really good advice.
yeah. I think you
Probably different.
you nailed it. You said that the same reason that athletes train, they're not competing against other athletes; they're competing
Yeah.
against themselves.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Which is why I no longer play much golf, because I keep losing against myself. That's a whole different story.
But you
Slightly
can
different.
always come play golf with me. I will make you feel great about
There you
yourself.
go. There you go. That's what we're looking for. What's the first thing, Paul, that you would want people to know about our industry from outside that they might not know?
It's time to take IT very, very seriously as
Mhm.
a business.
Yeah,
Um, it is time to realize that, hey, we don't understand that, and you geeks need to just go figure that out while we go off on our merry operation sales,
yeah, yeah,
doctor, lawyer
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Is done. Society has to understand how to deal with tech, and
yeah,
it has to take its technical professionals quite seriously. Right? It
yeah,
is. It is absolutely time for the world to stop giving technology a pass, like it's
yeah,
the cool new gadget, because everything we do depends on it now.
yeah, yeah. One of the things we say with CIOs, or CIOs often kind of repeat back, is, you know, it's not that there's a business strategy and an IT strategy. There's a strategy, and they're
Yeah,
essentially the same thing, right? At this point,
yeah.
brilliant. Okay, Paul. My only non-first question is my final question. Like, have you got any final thoughts for our viewers and listeners today?
Um, just first, I just want to thank you for having me on the program. This was absolutely fun. Like one of the funnest interviews I've ever done, and I'm very, very impressed with the work that you're doing at Foundry and in the magazines and the podcasts. I love the program. The second thing is, this is my message to the world: is you need professional IT people.
Hmm.
You need to start seriously considering how you create really talented technologists, and not just the cheapest ones, right?
Yeah,
That is what I've been after for a very long time, and I would be remiss if I didn't say it out there. And
yeah,
I don't mean just your business. I mean all businesses.
yeah. Yeah, no, hard agree here, and many, many thanks, Paul. This has been a great conversation. So my thanks to Paul Price, and thanks for all of you watching or listening to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT. I hope you'll agree, Paul is one of those, and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their first. And I feel like today we've learned an awful lot through that. I am your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And again, if you're an interesting person in IT, do let us know, because you might be our next first person. Thank you, Paul, and goodbye.